Welcome back to Worth the Effort, and in today's Throwback Thursday video, we're going to revisit something from July 8th, 2018. Back when my channel had about 62,000 views, this particular video, I think, got about 40,000 views in that first year it was out. The title of the video, the original video, was Hand Planes Are Stupid, and in hindsight, after 4 years, I really haven't seen too many hand plane videos that have discussed angles and vectors, and that's just terminology for how you use these to gain a lot more benefit in making the end result look better. So here we go, a quick excerpt, a snippet of a much longer video on hand planes and how to use them.
Now let's talk about using them. I mean, a lot of people get frustrated even after they get them set up that they don't get the results they see on YouTube or what people describe in books and magazines and stuff like that. I mean, it's almost as if you need an aeronautical engineer because you're dealing with differing planes and vectors, both direction and amplitude. You're dealing with drift, you're dealing with angles. I feel like you need that beautiful mind, math equations, algorithms, syntax, all that kind of stuff, and being able to solve it on the fly just to make a nice shaving and get a smooth result. And that's the subject, the adjustment, the mechanics, the dynamics of the actual use that we're going to be discussing for the rest of this video. Now for the next little bit, here are some basic terms I want to talk about. The sole of the plane is the base of the plane, whether it be wood or metal, and the metal ones could be corrugated. You have your irons, which is actually the blade. A lot of them planes come with a chip breaker. On a metal one, they're generally fairly thin, but on a wood one, the ones I use from Hawk are kind of thick, and they have a lot of different functions. The bevel of a plane is the part you grind off, not the part you flatten the back of the plane. The inside of a plane, so you basically have a throat, and how close the blade is in that is what they're calling the throat. You also have the toe of the plane, the heel of the plane, this is called the mouth, and then the throat is kind of that section right in front of the hand plane. In a lot of hand planes, this is adjustable so you can open and close the throat. Now most planes are going to have some kind of angle, and that's the angle that the blade is interacting with the wood. It's not necessarily the angle of the frog, because the frog could be set at one angle, but because of maybe a tapering iron or your chip breaker, or maybe it's bevel up or bevel the edge is bevel up, it's the included angle of all of those that creates an angle of attack for the blade going through the wood. Now for most Stanley style metal planes, that is going to be the frog angle, because these are fairly straight and they're beveled down. So there you go there. Now this might seem like common sense, but planes have to deal with planes. I mean, maybe that's where they got their name. Flat surfaces, directions, huge planes out there. Normally that would be a board. And boards come to us flat, and mostly planes are trying to make it flat and visually appealing. But you have to deal with multiple planes, and it all goes back to what all woodworking is: the interaction between a blade and grain. So you have the bottom of the sole of the plane and the blade coming through like that. Then you have the wood that it's going to be riding on. Now there's another plane within that wood. You might just think the surface is the plane, but the wood has a mind of its own. Ideally, the grain of that board will be going so that as you move forward with your plane, the other plane is laid down. You're laying those cat hairs down. You're going uphill instead of downhill. Because if you go the other way, you're going to get a lot of tear out, and the plane's not going to work right. Now, assuming you are going with the grain, well, you've got different kinds of wood out there. You have hardwoods, softwoods. Generally, for the most part, softwoods can handle a lower angle of attack. So the blade can be dropped down to a lower angle, Or if you're using a bevel up, you can get a steeper angle on the bevel to lower it down. Now, that will make it not only push through the wood smoother, but it'll be easier to push through because you're not having to bend that wood up as much. But the harder the wood, the more likely you're starting to get a split above the head of the grain. Because when you start lowering the angle down, it starts acting more like a wedge than an edge. Which is why harder woods or figured woods tend to prefer a steeper angle of attack. I mean, some will even go positive. So you end up with a scraper plane. But that is not the whole story. If I come back over here and go back to a standard, let's say 45-degree angle, that is assuming my vector, my force, is going in line with the plane in the direction I want to go. That isn't always the case. That's a 2D analogy, and we live in a 3D world. So, let's say you have a hand plane. Most people would think that you push a hand plane forward, but I've always found that's not that comfortable. I typically will angle my hand plane a little bit so that instead of having a vector going straight forward, my vector has a little drift, to steal an airplane analogy. That would be like when the airplane's flying kind of cockeyed, dog-eyed, sideways. Because the wind is coming one direction, the plane wants to go the other direction, it kind of splits and averages out the difference. Same thing with a hand plane. By having it slightly sideways, it's more natural to push forward because I'm not having to twist my shoulders all around. Well, what happens to the angle of attack on the plane interacting with the wood when you do that? Well, I want you to picture somebody skiing. You have your skier going down, 2 skis, your poles, you probably have a kid on a bicycle chasing them, asking for $2. Better off dead reference. But if that skier is going straight down the hill, and that hill is at 45 degrees, well, his angle of attack going down the hill is 45 degrees, and that kid is going really, really fast. That's a maximum speed you can go. That's a maximum angle you can hit. But most of us don't ski like that. We'll come over and we'll ski sideways and we'll weave our way down. Well, if this distance is a short distance, all of a sudden when you start weaving it, that weaving action elongates the time that it takes you to go down, elongates the distance, it makes that hypotenuse a lot longer, thus the angles are a lot longer. But when you are drifting your plane, the same thing is happening to those wood fibers. If you attack a 40-degree frog angle straight on, well, the wood will actually just go straight up the plane blade at 45 degrees. But if you cant it a little bit, then all of a sudden this distance right here, kind of going sideways across that, is a lot longer than the distance just going straight down. So it lowers the angle down. It lowers the hypotenuse by making it longer. Now this ability to lower the angle has a lot of influence on how you use it. I know some people that use a higher frog for the simple reason that they always like to use a smoothing plane at a slight angle because it changes the ability for it to interact with a larger plane. And by that plane, I mean the plane that it's operating on. Look at it like this. I have a board. Let's pretend that this is the sole of a plane. So I come over here and I'm pushing this plane directly straight. Let's just draw an outline. How much of a board is this plane interacting as it goes forward? Well, it's interacting with whatever length the board is and this width right here. But what if you were to cant it, to drift it a little bit? All of a sudden, now you are interacting with this much of the board. So if I'm trying to flatten a board Well, if it's got a little bit of a high spot here and a little bit of a high spot there, this plane right here is just going to make the lower spot lower. But if I have a little bit of a high spot here and a little bit of a high spot there, well, at least this plane, this use of the plane will capture those uses, and that in-between spot right there will not get shaved. And then when I move over a little bit, it'll ride in that lower spot there and capture the higher spot. So it kind of goes in and out a little bit better and covers a wider path. So that takes us to the next area of the length of your sole. How does that affect how you're using it? So, am I freaking you out with a giant brain dump yet? Let's go to grab a plane and grab a board and see how these things are actually interacting in real life. So right here I have a southern yellow pine board, an oak board, and a cherry board. So just to show you, I'm going to be using my general purpose wooden hand plane, not really a smoother, not really a jack, just kind of all around machine. Make sure I've got the grain going somewhat the way I want, uphill. So I plane it. If I go with the pine, I can go straight across, take off the high spots and get me a nice shaving. And there we go, fairly thin shaving coming off. Got a pretty sharp blade in there right now. But if I start lowering the plane blade angle, not only do the shavings change, but it's a lot easier for me to control it, and I can get finer and finer cuts, and it gets a little bit smoother because as you lower the angle of attack, you're also increasing the sharpness. It's weird how it works that way. But at a certain point, you get diminishing returns. Now, I was going pretty angled on that last pass. If I did that same thing with oak, really low angle of attack, well, let me get it flat first. It's got some machine marks on it. So we're starting to get nice shavings coming off of it. It's nice and smooth, but my angle of attack is the 45 degrees I have right here. I start lowering that angle of attack, and all of a sudden, you're going to start getting tear out because the oak is going to split. So can you see all that tear out? Let's see if it shows up in the camera. Little white spots, fibers being ripped out because I was acting at it at too low an angle. Whereas on this side where I hit it with a nice 45 degree angle, it's pretty smooth. Same thing might happen with the cherry. Get it smooth. Start taking shavings off of it. I've gotten it nice and glass smooth. Can you see that? See the reflection of the hand plane blade in it? Maybe not. You can somewhat see the reflection color change in there. Now watch what happens if I start angling it. Oh yeah, you can feel the tear out coming. See the little divots that are happening all along. It's just got too low an angle at that point. When I take 45 and I split it in half, now you're looking at a 20 degree angle, which is just way too low for cherry. Now let's play around with my workbench, okay? So it's fairly flat, but it's not perfectly flat. I don't really care if it is perfectly flat, but it'll give us a good reference because it's nice and dirty. So anywhere I plane on it, you're going to see the color change. So if I simply take my hand plane going with the grain this way and I go straight at it, you can see it takes off certain spots here and there, but misses some spots like right there. Boom, okay? But if I were to plane it off this way over that same area, well, theoretically, it should be smoother now because I just planed it. But because there's going to be variations in height on this side and that side, you're going, oh, I just skipped over this entire section right here. It's not taking any kind of shavings, even though it's shaved over there. And that's how I can know that it's going to be in plane all over the place. It's not going to be little valleys in line of the path. So when you're smoothing, you have to take in consideration that. It might be, if you're smoothing something really hard, that you need a pretty steep angle so that you can come over wider spots and just hit. See how much less I'm taking off because I'm pushing it at this angle. Whereas if I were to just go straight with the grain, it's taking the big shavings. I think what I'm trying to really drive home here is that using a plane is all about planes and angles. And life is not 2D. So we've got to take into consideration vectors, drift, even the amount of power you push through it will affect everything about that interaction between the cutting edge and wood fibers. And none of this is overly complex. It's kind of common sense when you think about it. But until somebody points it out one time and asks you to really analyze what's going on, it might not register.